And then he issues a warning. If anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, or wood, hay, and straw, each man's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it. What day? The day of judgment. Because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. And so he's talking about the foundation of Christ and the fact that we're building gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, and straw. Where is he getting these images? As a first century Jew, he wouldn't even think about it because this was so natural. Where do you find wood, hay, straw, gold, silver, precious stones? A temple. When Paul announces that we are God's building and that the foundation is Christ, and we better be careful on how we build, because if it's gold, silver, and precious stones, true works of holy charity, these will last. But if it's wood, hay, and straw, these won't last. Because as you proceed into the temple, first you have to be washed with the bath of the mikvaot. You had to be purified. Only then were you allowed into the sacred precincts of the temple. But you're in the outer court. And as you pass through the outer court, there is, of course, this altar, the bronze altar for burnt offerings. And what do you have? A lot of wood, a lot of straw to start the fire, a lot of hay and stubble. Because the wood, hay, and straw was used to kind of kindle the fire of the altar for sacrifice that everybody had to kind of approach. But you didn't stop there, you started there. Because you passed through the holy place into the Holy of Holies in the high priest. And as you pass through the holy place, everything is silver. When you enter the Holy of Holies, the presence of God, where only the high priest could go one day a year on the Day of Atonement, everything is gold. And what is he wearing? The breastplate with the 12 precious stones that represent the 12 tribes of Israel. How precious they are to the God of Abraham. So the gold, the silver, the precious stones, this is that part of the building where God dwells. This is where he calls us. This is where he enters into intimate communion with us. Not just in the outer court, not just in the bronze altar where you have wood, hay, and straw. So be careful, he says. It was interesting to me to read this because, to be honest, as an evangelical Protestant, I expected him to turn right when he turned left, to zig when he zagged. Because if we are God's building, then he ought to say, as he states in verse 16, do you not know that you are God's temple? In Greek, naos. As a Protestant, I always thought, no, Paul, what you want to say is, don't you know that you are God's synagogue? The synagogue, because that's a place of prayer, that's a place of preaching, proclaiming the word, that's a place of religious services, but you don't mean a temple. Because if you say you are God's temple, Paul, you have to realize that a temple is a place where you find priests and altars and sacrifices. And guess what? We didn't have it in our churches. We didn't have priests. We didn't have altars. We didn't have sacrifices. We had what you found in synagogues. We had the word, we had the pulpit, we had the liturgy of the word, we had fellowship, we had songs. But Paul is stating to the church that you are God's temple. And so be careful. There was something else that he said here that kind of troubled me. Listen to this. If the work which any man has built on the foundation survives, gold, silver, precious stones, he'll receive a reward. But if any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Did you catch that? People who do works of holy charity, the gold, the silver, the precious stones, they will be rewarded. But those whose works are like wood, hay, and straw, well, what? If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. What on earth is he talking about? What we would probably call purgatory. It's the fire of God's love that confronts the lameness, the weakness, the shallowness of our own works. And it purifies them. If it's gold, it's purified. But if it's wood, it's burned up. But notice, as Pope Benedict has recently shown, that this passage doesn't argue for purgatory, it takes it for granted. That the fire of God's temple is something greater. Because we're not talking about an earthly temple made with human hands. We're talking about a divine temple that is Christ himself, and the fire is not something man-made. The fire is God's Spirit through which we pass and by which we are transformed into the burning love of God. So, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Paul is describing for us who we are. We are more than just a society of people who share the same opinions. We're more than just a religious denomination with a really long tradition. We aren't just the biggest and the oldest denomination. What the Catholic Church represents is the fulfillment of what Christ promised us when he said, "On this rock I will build my church." On this rock I will build my church. He didn't say, "Go build me a church, Peter, and then James and John, you build me one too." He said, "On this rock I will build." He's the builder, we're the tools. I will build my church. It's his church. Just like he said in Matthew 7, a wise man builds his house upon a rock. Who's he referring to? Every Jew would have known. Who's the wisest of men? Solomon. And what's the greatest of houses? The temple that Solomon built. And what is the largest of stones, the largest of rocks? The Even Shetiyah, the foundation stone on which Solomon constructed the temple. Do you know, by looking at a photograph, where Solomon's temple once stood? Immediately. What do you see in any photograph of Jerusalem? The big golden dome, which they call what? The Dome of the Rock. Because under that golden dome is this enormous stone about the size of this entire church, over which the dome is built. That was the rock on which Solomon built the temple. This is the image that Jesus alludes to when he says, "A wise man builds his house upon the rock." Only it's not an earthly temple made by human hands. This is a divine temple. He says, "On this rock I will build my church." It is not a stone, it is Peter. It is a person. And we are all rocks, we are all stones, we are all part of this temple. And yet this foundation of Christ is on that on which we build our lives. But is it gold? Is it silver, precious stones, or is it wood, hay, and straw? It's also significant, if we read the Bible in the church and with the church, that Paul, again, is thinking, as I found, not like an evangelical who sees the liturgy of the word in a synagogue as the model, but as a Catholic who sees the temple with the priesthood and the altar and the sacrifice. For example, in the very next chapter, just a couple verses later, Paul states, this is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. The word steward, oikonomos, is, a family servant. But the word mysteries in Greek is what? Mysteria. And what do the Eastern Catholics call the sacraments? The mysteries, the divine mysteries. What we call in Latin sacramenta, they refer to as the mysteries. This is how you should regard us, as stewards of the mysteries. So if Paul sees the church as the temple in which he ministers, what is it that he administers? The mysteries.